Another Rowan Files mystery. Someone heard my wish. There are certain places that return to you, not because you went looking for them, but because something in them never quite let you go. For Nell Rowan, it wasn't a cottage, nor a path through the village, but a fountain, not in Aldervale, in London. She had gone there as a girl, not quite a child, not quite grown. The sort of age where the world begins to sharpen, but still holds a little softness at the edges. The square was busy. Voices, footsteps, the constant passing of people who had somewhere else to be. And at the centre of it all, a fountain. Water rising and falling in steady rhythm, coins catching the light as they sank, and people, without really stopping, slowing just enough to throw something in. She watched them longer than the others did. That was always her way. Not the fountain itself, but the people. A woman who paused just for a second before letting her coin fall. A man who tossed his in quickly, as though it really didn't matter, and yet didn't quite walk away straight after. A girl, not much younger than Nell herself, who closed her eyes, just briefly, as though something important had been said. Nell didn't think of it as magic. Even then, she wasn't quite sure if magical thinking could be real. But she understood something. That people were stopping because they believed. They were stopping because, for a moment, they wanted to wish. She remembered reaching into the pocket of her coat and finding a coin her mother had given her for something practical. A bun, perhaps, or a cup of tea later on the journey. She held it between finger and thumb, looking at the water, at the pale glint of other people's wishes, sunk below the surface. She could not have said exactly what came over her then. Not belief. Not even hope in the full, blazing sense. Only that strange human softness that appears when no one is asking anything of you. When there is no need to explain yourself. When you are permitted for one quiet second to want. So she dropped the coin. She remembered the sound better than the wish. A small, metallic kiss against the water. Gone. She had stood there afterwards feeling oddly exposed, though no one had looked at her, as though some secret had slipped from her hand with the coin. Something not fully formed, but no longer entirely hers. She had not thought about that fountain in years, not consciously, but some places do not leave you entirely, they wait. And sometimes they return. When something in your present begins to echo what you once noticed, but didn't yet understand. It was on a Wednesday morning, many years later, that the memory came back. Nell had gone into Aldervale earlier than usual, The day had begun in that undecided English way that could not make up its mind whether to be silver or gold. The pavements still held last night's damp in their cracks. Delivery vans had already come and gone, and Mrs. Cartwright was outside the baker's with her tartan shopping trolley, speaking to no one in particular and yet being heard by everyone, just gossiping to herself. The village square was not grand, but it had its own sort of dignity, old stone, hanging baskets in the warmer months, benches polished by weather and use, the church spire visible if you stood at the right angle, and at its centre, set there years ago by some well-meaning committee, hoping to make the place feel more welcoming to visitors, was a small circular fountain. It was never mistaken for Paris or Rome. No postcards were made of it. No one crossed counties to see it. And yet, people used it. The children leaned over its edge in summer, daring each other to reach, daring each other to reach just a little further. Teenagers sat around it with chip wrappers and paper bags, talking loudly about nothing in particular and everything at once. Dogs strained at their leads for the water, to the despair of their owners. Visitors paused, one hand holding a phone, the other already fishing in a pocket without quite knowing why. Coins appeared there often enough. Nell rarely paid it much attention. Not until that morning. She was crossing the square with a loaf tucked under one arm and a small bundle of rosemary in her basket when she heard it. "I wish he'd leave me alone." The words were muttered rather than spoken, not dramatic, not tearful, barely louder than breath. A young woman stood by the fountain, one hand in the pocket of her coat, the other hovering above the water with a coin resting in her palm. She looked no more than 30, dark hair tied back without much care, shoes that belonged to an office rather than cobbled streets, a face not worn by time but by thought, ingrained, deep thoughts. Nell did not stop at once, she only slowed. The woman seemed startled by her own voice, as though she had not meant to say the sentence aloud. She dropped the coin quickly, glancing around as if to check whether anyone had heard, and then walked away very briskly. Nell stood still for a moment longer, not because the wish was unusual. Wishes were everywhere once you listened. I wish this would stop. I wish things were different. I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I could begin again. I wish for better. I wish for more. I wish for more money. I wish for fame, and on and on. They slipped through ordinary life unannounced and often unnoticed. No. What stayed with Nell was something else. The feeling. That same quiet shift she had known once before, standing at a fountain with a coin in her hand. By midday, the square had gathered itself into its usual rhythm. 2 schoolboys kicked a football too close to the memorial and were met with predictable disapproval. A pram stood beside a bench while its owner attempted to manage both shopping and dignity at once. A man in a courier jacket checked his phone as though it might answer something more than messages. And there, seated on the low edge of the fountain, was the same young woman. Nell crossed the square and sat at the other end of the stone rim, leaving a respectful space between them. After a moment, she said lightly, "It's too cold for a coffee to be abandoned like that." The woman looked down, almost surprised to find it still in her hands. "I forgot I had it." "That happens. Tea suffers the same fate," said Nell, with a small smile. "Nell Rowan." "Mara," the girl said. The name settled easily. After a pause, Nell said, "I heard you earlier." Mara closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't mean to say it out loud." "Most people don't." Mara looked into the water. "I was just tired." Nell nodded. Nothing about that needed embellishment. They spoke only enough for Nell to understand that it was about a man at work. Nothing clear enough to accuse. Everything persistent enough to unsettle, to instill fear. "If I say something," Mara said quietly, "it sounds small. And if I say nothing, it grows." Nell considered that, then gently, "Would you like to come for a cup of tea in my cottage later?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. The cottage held its usual warmth that evening. Lamplight rested on familiar objects. The kettle had already been on. The room felt as though it had been expecting them. Mara sat opposite Nell, still carrying the shape of the day with her, but no longer holding it quite so tightly. The cards rested between them. "I don't really know what I think about this," Mara said. "That's quite all right," Nell replied. "We're not asking you to." Nell picked up the tarot cards from her table. She shuffled and then passed the deck, cut them. Mara did, and looked at Nell. "I really don't know what I think about this," Mara said. "I'm not sure." But Nell turned the first card, because it helped to open the door to conversation that was very clearly, desperately needed. The moon. "Half light," she said quietly. "Knowing something is wrong without being able to prove it in a way that others will accept." Mara nodded almost immediately. "Yes," she said. And so she was ready for the second card. 8 of Swords. The feeling of being held in place, not by walls, but by doubt, by the fear of being mistaken or dismissed. Mara exhaled. That's exactly it, she said. The cards were doing their job. Mara was ready to talk. The third card, the Ace of Cups, and something softened. This, said Nell, is what arrives when you stop arguing with what you feel and begin to trust it. Silence settled for a bit between them, clear, unforced. After a while, Mara said quietly, I keep wishing for things to stop. And sometimes I wish for better things. I just don't know how to hold those. Nell leaned back slightly. Most people don't realise, she said, that the shape of a wish matters. Mara looked up. If you spend your time wishing things away, your life begins to gather around what you're trying to escape. Let me repeat that sentence. If you spend your time wishing things away, your life begins to gather around what you are trying to escape. Those words landed gently, not heavy, just true, very true. Mara sat very still, and then slowly. So, instead of, I wish he'd leave me alone, Nell waited. Mara's voice steadied. I want peace. Nell smiled, yes. At the end of the evening, Mara had written 3 things on a small piece of paper. What happened, what she felt, and what she wanted now. And she held that last line the longest. The days that followed did not transform all at once. They shifted, quietly. At work, Mara spoke. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly. And once she did, the shape of things began to change. When she returned some weeks later, it was not to explain, it was simply to be seen. They sat outside beneath the rowan tree. Spring had begun to settle into the edges of the village. It's still ongoing, Mara said. Nothing's finished. No, said Nell, but something has begun. Mara smiled. Yes. She paused. I went back to the fountain. Nell raised a brow. I didn't throw anything in this time. No? No, I just stood there. She took a small breath. And I noticed how often I say it. I wish. Nell nodded. And now? Mara smiled quietly. Now I hear it. Later, after Mara had gone, Nell stood for a moment beneath the rowan tree, and the memory of London returned. Softer now. The coin, the water, the feeling she had not understood then. Perhaps it had never been about the wish coming true, or any wishes coming true. Perhaps it had only been about this, that the moment something inside you becomes clear enough to be named, it does come true. And in the centre of Alder Vale, the fountain continued, as it always had, water rising, falling, returning. Coins gathered quietly at the bottom, not because anyone truly believed, they just hoped. Because for a moment, It felt as though something might, yes, it just might, because maybe someone heard my wish. As a closing reflection here, perhaps there's a wish you have been carrying too. Not a grand one, just a quiet one. So for a moment, notice it. Just sit with it and hear it. And perhaps gently let it change its shape. Not, I wish this would stop, but I want peace. Because sometimes the beginning is not that a wish is granted, but that it is finally heard. And if you are listening now, perhaps there's a wish you have been carrying also. Not a grand one, not a perfect one. Just something quiet. Something that has followed you through your days, without asking to be fully seen. So for a moment now, just feel yourself soften. Loosen your shoulders and let your breath slow. Imagine a fountain. Not a grand one, not a famous one. Just a simple place. Somewhere you might pass without really thinking, and yet today you have stopped. Paused at the foot of the fountain. You hear the water first, a gentle, steady movement, rising, falling, returning to itself. There is no rush, no urgency, only rhythm in the water. Notice the light. Perhaps it's morning, soft and pale. Maybe evening, where everything turns slightly gold. The surface of the water catches it and holds it for a moment, then lets it go. Now notice your hands, resting easily. Nothing to hold, nothing to prepare for, just to be present, to be here. Imagine a small coin resting in your palm. It's not heavy, just enough to feel real, to feel cool against your skin. But this time there is no need to throw it, no need to give anything away, no need to hope that something outside of you will change your life. Instead, let the coin become something else, a thought, a sentence, a quiet wish you may not have said clearly before. Take a moment. Try to notice what it is. Without judging it, without correcting it, just hearing it as it is right now. Perhaps it sounds like, I wish this would stop. I wish things were different. I wish I could rest. I wish for more. Let it be exactly what it is. And now, very gently, see if it can change shape. Not forced, not perfected, not I wish this would stop, but I want peace. Not, I wish things were different, but I'm allowed to change them. Not, I wish someone will see me, but I am here. Let those words settle, like water finding stillness again. You don't need to throw those words anywhere. You don't need to prove them or need to rush toward them. Just let them exist clearly, quietly within you, and notice how that feels. Just for a moment. And as the fountain continues, unchanged, water rising, falling, returning, with you standing beside it. Not needing anything from it now, really. Only this. The quiet understanding that the most important wish you carry is the one you are willing to hear. Stay here for a few breaths. Just as you are, nothing to fix, nothing to decide. Just resting in that small, honest awareness. Then gently let that image fade. Nothing lost, just set aside. Bringing with you not the wish itself, but the clarity and understanding of it. Because that wish is where everything begins. That wishful thought that first stirred inside you. Knowing that someone heard your wish. You did. Rest well. Another Rowan Files mystery. Someone heard my wish. There are certain places that return to you, not because you went looking for them, but because something in them never quite let you go. For now, Rowan, it wasn't a cottage, nor a path through the village, but a fountain, not in Aldervale, in London. She had gone there as a girl, not quite a child, not quite grown. The sort of age where the world begins to sharpen, but still holds a little softness at the edges. The square was busy. Voices, footsteps, the constant passing of people who had somewhere else to be. And at the centre of it all, a fountain. Water rising and falling in steady rhythm, coins catching the light as they sank, and people, without really stopping, slowing just enough to throw something in. She watched them longer than the others did. That was always her way. Not the fountain itself, but the people. A woman who paused just for a second before letting her coin fall. A man who tossed his in quickly, as though it really didn't matter, and yet didn't quite walk away straight after. A girl, not much younger than Nell herself, who closed her eyes, just briefly, as though something important had been said.